Technology usually has a shelf life. Great new inventions are heralded as incredible breakthroughs when they happen, but they're only incredible until the next new invention comes along, and then they become obsolete. That's the process that drives technology forward, but it's also the process that's led to the abandonment of several high-tech facilities all over the world. Everything you're about to see was once considered to be at the cutting edge of the modern age, but became abandoned as time moved on. Visit Istra in Russia, and you'll find the towering hulk of machinery that was once the Marx generator. There's no power flowing through the generator today, but once upon a time, this was a lightning machine so powerful that it equaled every other generating machine in the whole country put together. The generator was built by the Russian Electrical Engineering Institute during the 1970s to test lightning insulation. When it was operating at the peak of its capacity, it could discharge for a fraction of a second, barely over 100 microseconds, and create artificial lightning. Its purpose was to test lightning insulation for military aircraft. Former Russian President Boris Yeltsin used to serve as the facility supervisor. The site, which was also known as the Istra High Voltage Research Center, was largely abandoned after the fall of the Soviet Union, but has been switched on sporadically since then when its unique abilities have been required. The most recent instance was in 2014 when it was used to test the lightning strike resistance of the Sukhoi Superjet 100. The Halley 6 Antarctic Research Station isn't entirely abandoned, but between February and November every year, it operates alone, without a single human occupant. You'll find it on Antarctica's Brunt ice shelf, blasted by wind and dealing with temperatures as low as minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, with only a nearby colony of penguins for company. The location is so remote that for several months of the year, it doesn't see the sun at all, spending all 24 hours of each day in darkness. The purpose of Halley 6 is to collect data on atmospheric chemistry and space weather. It was here that the hole in the ozone layer was discovered in 1985, thanks to data obtained by the station. In theory, the station is mobile. It drifts towards the Weddell Sea at a distance of around 6 feet every day, but stands on skis, and so it can be towed back into position to avoid the risk of it falling away from its ice shelf. Outside of summer months, the site is inaccessible, so during its human free time, it automatically collects information and relays it to the British Antarctic Survey's office in Cambridge, England. In mid-2019, an abandoned giant Soviet telescope appeared in news articles all over the world after it was rediscovered by urban explorers in a remote part of the Armenian mountains. The Hirowini Mirror Telescope is covered in snow 6,000 feet above sea level on the side of Armenia's Mount Ararat, and appears to have been abandoned for some time. The reasons for its abandonment are unknown, but based on the photographs obtained by the explorers, it appears to be beyond the point where it could be salvaged. The telescope's wall has partially collapsed, and many of the pipes around the observation room are cracked and broken. In other places, though, for example the control room, there are still computer terminals in place and carpets on the floor, as if the scientists who worked here left yesterday. The telescope was built in 1985, but likely became abandoned in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Given that millions of dollars must have been spent on the construction of this enormous facility, 6 years of operation seems like a poor return on that investment. If you started off in the Russian town of Vasilzursk and headed east for around 70 miles, you'd eventually come to the Sura Ionospheric heating facility. When it was operational, it was considered to be the Russian answer to the American HARP project. If the official account for the reasons for its existence is taken at face value, the facility was a laboratory used to conduct ionosphere research on the Earth's upper atmosphere. The enormously powerful station could radiate 80 megawatts at 4.3 megahertz, although that could be pushed up to 260 megawatts at 9.5 megahertz. Work at the facility started in 1981, allowing Russian scientists to study the effect of low-frequency emissions on the ionosphere. The Soviet Defense Department paid for the creation and maintenance of the vast site, which led to suspicions in America that it might actually be an enormous atmospheric weapon. Even today, some conspiracy theorists believe that the abandoned site is sometimes used to cause earthquakes and other natural disasters elsewhere in the world. There's no evidence to support that theory, but that doesn't stop the accusations from being made. You can't talk about the history of oil in Azerbaijan without talking about Neft Dazlari, known colloquially as the oil rocks. Technically speaking, it's an oil platform, but given its size, it might be more accurate to describe it as a fully sized town, living on artificial platforms on the water. When it was built in 1949, it was the first offshore oil platform in the world. You might think that these images of the oil rocks seem familiar to you, and if you do, that's probably because you saw them in the James Bond movie The World Is Not Enough in 1999, where they were used as a filming location. There are almost 200 miles of roads and streets inside Neft Dazlari, built on huge human-made piles of landfill and rock. Those streets once contained hotels, bars, bakeries, and even lemonade workshops, serving a population of around 2,000 people. Usage of the oil rocks began to decline after Azerbaijan gained independence, resulting in the platforms falling into a state of disrepair. No plans have been drawn up to repair or replace them, and so the site is being abandoned a piece at a time. Moving away from Russia and the former Soviet states, we're now headed to the state of Vermont in the United States of America, which is where we find the abandoned North Concord Air Force Station. This entire site is the product of Cold War paranoia. During the 1950s, Americans feared that the USSR might launch a nuclear attack on them at any moment. This radar base was constructed as an early warning system. It took 2 years and $20 million to build the base, starting in 1954. A crew of 174 people maintained it, with theaters and bowling alleys provided at the site to make up for the all-year-round bad weather in the remote, mountainous location. It lasted less than a decade before being closed down in 1963, with all of its buildings left standing. Since then, it's become associated with UFO sightings in the area, and also a strange series of fatal accidents involving urban explorers falling from walkways and windows. Because of that, and also because the buildings have become hazardous after years of being left to fend for themselves, the rapidly deteriorating structures of the former spy station are now fenced off. Sticking with abandoned American locations for now, our next stop is in Daggett, California, where we find the abandoned Solar 1 and Solar 2 facilities reflecting the sunlight of the Mojave Desert. Both of them played vital roles in the early stages of developing solar power technology. As their names suggest, Solar 1 came first, opening in 1981 and continuing to generate power until 1988 by using its bank of heliostat reflectors to deflect heat toward a 350-foot tall central tower. Although it could produce power, it was bad at storing it, and so it was replaced by Solar 2 in 1995. This larger network of reflectors featured 2,000 heliostats and stored energy in a molten nitrate salt power bank. It ran for 4 years, generating enough power to supply the equivalent of 7,500 typical American homes. After decommissioning in 1999, Solar 2 was briefly used as a telescope to measure gamma rays. The central towers of both the plants were torn down in 2009, leaving the mirrors alone and unused in the sand. Newer solar energy plants exist all around them, covering miles of the Californian desert. Human beings have been using water to generate power for far longer than they've been using the sun, and to do that, you need a dam. The Enloe Dam and power plant near Oroville in Washington, USA, was once a shining example of water power in action. Construction work on the dam began in 1916 and continued until 1923, resulting in the creation of a concrete arch gravity dam standing over 50 feet tall, with a 300-foot crest. Unfortunately, environmental concerns weren't factored into the design of such facilities back then, and the lack of fish ladders in the design blocked the migration of fish into the Similkameen River. The dam produced energy for over 30 years before operations ceased in 1958. due to the creation of the Bonneville Power Administration System, which could produce more power at a lower cost. 3 proposals to reopen or renovate the dam have been submitted in the years since, all of which were rejected because they didn't include plans to resolve the problem with fish in the area. It's now in an advanced state of dilapidation. Next up is another example of Cold War paranoia leading to unlikely creations. This time, it's a so-called space gun in Barbados. To give it its full title, this is the Project Harp Space Gun, with the word HARP being an acronym for High Altitude Research Project. It was a collaborative endeavor between the military forces of the USA and Canada, with the aim of building a gun so massive and powerful that it could launch objects into the upper atmosphere. It succeeded in that aim. After work started in 1961, the gun fired a test projectile an incredible 112 miles into the air during a 1963 test. That's a fact made all the more remarkable when you consider that it's little more than a 50 caliber cannon from a naval battleship that's been modified into a 100 caliber cannon. The end goal for the project was to launch satellites into orbit from the ground, and also potentially fire weapons across enormous distances. But in 1967, the American side of the project pulled funding after war broke out in Vietnam. They never came back to their work after the war ended, and so the cannon has become nothing more than a rusty curiosity surrounded by dense bushes. We have another Cold War relic to show you. It's an abandoned microwave tower in Kansas, with the logo of the telecommunications network AT&T stamped on signage at its base. That's because it was once part of a network called Long Lines, built in the early 1950s. This was the first large-scale microwave-based transmission network for broadcasting and communications anywhere in the world when it was created, and remained in operation for almost the rest of the 20th century. Only when the internet came along did it become obsolete. It simply wasn't capable of catering for the same kind of bandwidth you get from fiber optic cables. It may once have had a more sinister purpose, though. Rumors in the area around the tower suggest that it was once part of the NSA's Fairview program, which carried out monitoring, espionage, and surveillance duties during the peak years of the Cold War. Might it even still be active? Well, nobody knows for sure. The tower shows signs of rust and corrosion, but the horn reflector antennae at the top of it are still in place. Generally speaking, when a tower like this is decommissioned, the antennae are removed. Perhaps it's still listening to us. While the microwave tower in Kansas might have been an NSA listening post, Teufelsberg in Berlin, Germany definitely was. The strange building with its spherical tower tops can be found on an artificial hill hat locals refer to as the Devil's Mountain. The American National Security Agency built Teufelsberg in West Berlin to intercept communications in East Berlin, which became part of Communist East Germany in the years following the Second World War. Amusingly, the US spies who worked there were reliant on a large Ferris wheel at a fairground nearby to amplify their capabilities, and received almost no intel during the few months of the year when the fair was closed and the wheel was taken down. When the Berlin Wall fell, taking the last traces of communism in East Germany with it, the NSA no longer needed the facility, and so it was left to abandonment. It's been broken into by numerous intrepid urban explorers since then, although anyone going there today does so at their own peril. The views from the top are spectacular, but it's understood that the interior has deteriorated so badly that a lift shaft has been left open, with a 10-story plunge awaiting anyone foolish enough to step inside. Standing derelict in the fields around Ukraine's Ivankivsky district is a radar facility that was once so powerful that it used to disrupt radio broadcasts everywhere in the world. When it was powered up, the facility broadcast a constant ticking or tapping sound that could be picked up on radios thousands of miles away, and earned the Duga Radar the nickname of the Russian Woodpecker. Yet again, the creation of this unbelievably huge radar network was a Cold War paranoia project. Just as the Americans were building missile strike early warning systems, So were the Soviets. Duga was assembled during the 1970s, consisting mainly of two gigantic steel lattice structures. The first stands 450 feet high and 1,600 feet long, and the second is a slightly more modest 250 feet tall and 700 feet long. A facility this massive needs the support of a lot of people to run efficiently, and so the Soviets built a small town nearby with a population of around 1,000. It wasn't until the end of the Cold War and the fall of the USSR that the world finally found out where those pesky tapping noises had been coming from for so many years, although activity at the site had been significantly scaled back due to its proximity to Chernobyl after the nuclear disaster in 1987.
Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.